So far, I've focused on distortion issues that relate primarily to the instrument that provides what's probably the most obvious application for distortion, at least full-blown distortion, the electric guitar and guitar amps. But electric guitar is not the only instrument that can benefit from a little extra edge now and again, and it would probably be a mistake to think of it as the only candidate for some nice distortion or overdrive. Now, of course, many audio signals are subjected to a subtle level of distortion that doesn't really sound like distortion, the classic warmth and presence that comes from so many analog processors, real and virtual. But that's the topic for the next video. Here, I'm talking about distortion that does sound distorted, just applying it in larger or smaller quantities to instruments that don't happen to come with 6 strings. Sometimes, the same amps and stomp boxes, again, both real and virtual, that provide the crunch and grind for electric guitars and basses may have something to offer other instruments that can be run through them. A classic example would be electric piano. Electric pianos, like the Fender Rhodes and the Wurlitzer, are among the most familiar instruments in rock, jazz, R&B, all styles of music. And they're also good candidates for a little extra edge. The fairly mellow, bell-like tones they produce can tend to sound a little bland on their own. That's probably part of the reason those keyboards were equipped with effects like phasing and tremolo. But there's nothing better to add a little sparkle and punch to a classic electric piano than some nice, gentle overdrive. For example, the earliest Fender Rhodes models came with their own built-in tube amps and speakers, and later, more portable models were expected to be played through guitar amps. In fact, the early Rhodes stage pianos were voiced, tuned up and tweaked at the factory while playing them through the ubiquitous Fender Twin Reverb amp, a fairly high-powered, all-tube guitar amp with 2 12-inch speakers. While the Twin is, in the overall scheme of things, a relatively clean tube amp, it still adds a nice grit to a Rhodes played through it, for a more punchy quality. The subtle distortion harmonics add to the piano's own, and the result is a sound with quite a bit more oomph. Other keyboards can take a lot more overt distortion, especially organs. Everybody's probably familiar with the Hammond B3 and its companion piece, the Leslie speaker cabinet, which comes with rotating speakers for that classic swirling effect, and a tube amp, which, when cranked, adds some truly classic grind to the basic organ tone, pretty much defining the rock organ sound. Even the so-called cheesy transistor organs, like the Farfisa and Vox Continental, which seem to make a comeback every 10 years or so, can handle their distortion. Sometimes a nice fuzz box can really add some hair to a bland organ sound. Some people even like slightly distorting things like drums. This drum track is being fed through a virtual model of an old Shure PA vocal limiter, which can be set to heavily compress and distort the kit, making for a dramatic effect in the right context. The original device, of course, wasn't really intended to be an effect, especially not a distorted effect, so pressing it into service as one is a good example of how analog gear can often have happy surprises lurking under the hood when it comes to distortion, if you give it a little push. Even vocals can sometimes be overdriven as an effect. The vocal counterpoint in this song was always intended to be run through an effect of some sort, originally just a classic telephone voice filter. But overdriving it through a small guitar amp worked even better, helping it cut through a busy part of the mix and making it stand out without really being in the front of the musical arrangement. So don't forget to think of distortion in one form or another for all those other non-guitar tracks in a mix. It can lend its magic to many different things, as long as it's applied with a careful hand and a creative ear.